Okay, our next speaker is Professor Anita Sarma from University of Nebraska-Lincoln. And Anita is an ISR alumni, and we're very happy that she could be here today.
I guess this is on now?
Yes.
All right. And that's the timer, including 20 minutes?
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Dick, for introducing me. My research encompasses 3 areas. One is understanding online communities. A lot of you guys must have looked at Stack Overflow, GitHub. We looked at some parts of GitHub, right? So our basic understanding of what a software developer is, one person sitting in a computer working away, is slowly changing. We are an online community. We get code from each other. We ask questions. We look at people's social reputation. We look at, oh, should I trust this person? Who else has used this code? There are lots of social information gets in, and this is a new way that we are looking at computing, looking at programming. So one of the goals is understanding what motivates people to join these communities, what keeps them, what is the quality of such places. Another one is looking at supporting coordination. When we have looked at online communities or also other kinds of software development, it's no longer there's one single person writing his 1,000 line of code, but it's millions of lines of code that go into creating an entire software system, which means you have to work with others, which means you have to deal with their constraints and your constraints that somehow get things completely fitted together so you create the software. That's my second line of research. And the third line, which kind of encompasses both, is computer programmers are no longer the only people who are in programming. We have this whole bunch of other people like scientists, even office workers. They write programs. They don't write programs because they get paid, but they write programs because that's one of the part of the job, like making a climate model. You have to write some programs. And these users typically don't have much of software engineering infrastructure to support them, and they are not interested in software engineering because that's not their job description. They want something to get done, but they do use and reuse a lot of software. And one of my goals is to see how we can kind of leverage all this information and knowledge we have from software engineering and kind of give it to them seamlessly under the hood so they don't have to think about it. But given that this talk is only going to be 15 minutes, I'm going to focus on supporting coordination in distributed software development. So here's a little Lego piece. We have these little pieces that fit so nicely together. Software is something like that, right? We have all these different classes, this APIs, this modules, we get third-party software, and we have to all put them together, and automatically they work, right? You hit the button, execute, and it works. What that also means in today's software is you have people in teams who are working together, right? And if you look at this particular picture I have stolen from the web, there's this blue guy who has made some changes, and there is this ripple effect that goes to this other person. And it goes through this chain until this green guy. And it might be that this blue person made this change, and there was all this impact rippling through, and when this green person is trying to compile his code or test his code, like something is not working. How do I know why it is not working? Did I make some changes that made it not work? Did the guy in front of me, the red person, or this blue person? So we have to kind of follow this dependency to find out who has made this change and how it affects me. Part of looking at Jim's work, right, it was showing those complicated non-architecture structures because there are calls being made across these different parts of the system. So there are these technical dependencies that actually cause the social dependencies among the developers. I need to work with Jim here maybe because his code affects my code in some way. So I'm not in isolation. And keeping this mental model is really hard. This is Perl, which is supposedly a very simple language. And this is the non-architecture structure of this particular program. It's spaghetti code, really. Over here, we see blue stuff is packages. Colors are made by packages. So you see the blue thing looks a little modular, nice. The purple over there is really split into 2 systems. There's a green, red, and orange there, which is all over, right? There's no code structure or like no architecture there. So you can have great architecture, and if you keep ideally it works. But oftentimes what projects have is this mix of spaghetti code. And what that leaves is a lot of dependencies among people. So these are organizations or individual users who have contributed, and it shows their co-commits. Like when I have committed 2 different files together, I get a line across the 2 people. Moreover, things don't stay the same. As Jim's macro picture had, things evolve over time. And this is a picture from Visual Complexity about Perl. This shows these vertical lines show releases that occur, and the yellow stuff shows how much has changed between releases, right? Even if I take the lot of time and think, okay, this is what the APIs are, this is what the dependencies are, these are the teams I need to work with, but they don't stay static, they are dynamic. Code changes, developers move out, there's turnover, teams get reorganized, right? So a lot of dynamism that happens, and as a developer, I have to keep a lot of these things in mind. So what we want to do is, how can we help them? How can we help coordination? And when I do not remember things in my memory, and I'm making some changes, and I'm going to pick on Jim again because he's sitting in the front row, is I was writing this thing, we decided in a meeting that you won't change this file, and then you go ahead and change it, right? And I go and try to put my stuff in, and I'm like, it doesn't work. Who's to be blamed? Maybe there's actually a bug that someone introduced, but a lot of time things might happen because there was a coordination mismatch between the team members. When that happens, we can have like two types of conflicts, I call them. One is direct conflict, that is when the same file gets changed in parallel, and we have to now somehow merge our changes together. Because anybody uses Subversion or like a configuration manager systems, like Subversion, GitHub, these systems are pretty smart. They say, hey, whoever checked in first, Jim was fine, he checked in first. Anita, you're screwed because you're checking in second. They're already changed the system. I won't let you in because you have to synchronize your changes. So this is hard to do. A lot of developers complain whenever I was doing, this was my PhD topic actually, talking to people, they'll say, oh, please solve this problem. Merge conflicts are so hard, I do not like to update. Oftentimes people just try to completely overwrite other changes, which is not good team practice. But there's the other type of conflict, which is actually more difficult. And oftentimes when we have build failures or test failures, people assume they are bugs. But sometimes they are mismatches in assumptions and mismatches in how changes were actually rippled through the dependencies and affected something else. So you might have behavioral changes that I was making. I take this file, it looks fine. If I just change this algorithm a little bit, it will be efficient, it will be smarter, maybe it's going to be shorter. I do a nice job, I make it cleaner, but that might have these inherent dependencies going on that might affect somebody else. And those we call indirect conflicts, leading to when you try to build things together, there's this compilation issues, or even behavioral issues, which will be test problems. So how often do these occur? Are these made-up problems, or these are real-life situations, right? So we looked at 4 open source projects, Perl, Storm, Jenkins, Voldemort. Data was from GitHub, so we extracted all the data from Git. And anytime there was 2 parallel branches, 2 changes being made and merged, as we call merges. And then we find how many times there was a conflict. So if you look at that, it's 40% to 54, 34 to 54% of the times when 2 changes were put together, there was some kind of a problem. And then the way we looked at what the problem was, when we merged together, and if the merge failed by Git, we say, hey, there's a merge conflict, stop, let's add that. If the merge passed, then we had these projects were chosen because they had build scripts and test scripts in their repository. We ran the build script. If the build worked fine, and we looked at if the parent branches, there was no build failure, and the build failure occurred at the merge, this was a conflict because of coordination, so we say that's a build failure. If the build passes, then we run the test, and we say it's a test failure in the same practice. So if we look at merge conflicts go from 8 to 19%, build 2 to 15, and test from 6 to 35. Typically, what people have always assumed that merges are annoying, merges are difficult, but the same file, they're easy to resolve. And people assume merge, then build, then test, because that's how later in time a conflict is found. It's more difficult. But when we look at the resolution times, we don't see such a thing. Every project seems to have a different conflict profile. And that kind of makes a sense like, it's not that we can just say this type of conflict has a certain characteristics, but it's the underlying project specifics, right? Might be the files, might be the authors, might be something going on. And you can see average days, and in parentheses is the median days. Perl took 10 days as a median to resolve merge conflicts, 14 days for test, and looking at Jenkins, there was 4 and 2. So things kind of change. So problems occur, conflicts are a reality. How can we help in coordination? What can we do? So the questions that I like to ask is, okay, problems are happening because users are making changes. So can we identify emerging or potential conflicts? Can we actually predict how bad this conflict is going to be if you let it happen? And taking one step further, going from proactive to reactive, is there some way I can completely predict you two, when you work together on these two tasks, there might be a problem, so you might even choose a different task, and we completely avoid the conflicting situation. So that's the story I'm going to be talking in this presentation. Let's talk about identifying potential conflicts first. This is workspace awareness, came out in like 2003. That's when the area got focus and we're working. So the idea is you all need a private workspace, because if I'm making changes and other changes keep intruding, I cannot get any work done. But these become isolated. So can we break the isolation and be kind of insulated? So I know what's happening in somebody else's workspace, so you can let me know. So can we say, like, Anita, you're working on this file, Dick is working on the same file, there is potential conflict that could happen. Or Anita, you're working on this particular file, calling this method, and Jim again has changed that method without letting you know, so you're going to have a problem, right? So is there some way there is this monitoring system that checks what's happening in the workspaces and lets you know about it? So we notify them. This was my PhD topic called Palantir, basically Lord of the Rings, crystal ball, tells you what's happening in the other 7 kingdoms or other people's workspaces. It was a very simple solution. It was, can I just, in the workspace, very subtly let you know when things are happening and what things are happening around you. So in here, the blue would say there is a merge conflict happening. Red would say there's a indirect conflict, rest or bill failure could happen. You can get more information about it on the bottom stuff, on the bottom view. And what we found when we did user studies was conflicts were detected as they emerge. People are very, very sensitive. This was a user study. The first time they all tried to race, like, oh, there's a problem, let me get my stuff in first. But as soon as they realized they couldn't beat the system, they were very aware. As soon as the icon popped up, they wanted to look at it and see what the problem was. So they took actions. They would chat with their developers in the team. They wanted to fix things, so fewer conflicts grew out of hand when things were actually checked in at the end. The penalty was a small increase in time now. Because they were doing this kind of coordination action, they had to spend some time. This is all well and good. There's a whole lot of other tools that talk about that. But there are limitations, because you are still finding the conflict after they have happened, right? Developers have to understand, should I take an action now or can I do it for later? Most of them are very coarse-grained. At least all the tools that are in workspace awareness do very shallow kind of program analysis at the call graph level at the max or the AST trees, because the changes are ongoing, things are reverting back, so performing any significant sophisticated program analysis takes a lot of computation effort, and you don't often need sound analysis in this case. And there's always the potential for information overload or interruption, because as soon as something comes, I might take a break and say, oh, what's happening? Should I look at that? So some solutions that we have talked about is, can we do proactive conflict prediction? So instead of showing things at the file level, can we say where the problem is for the task? Can we be proactive? Before people have started changing things, can we tell them? Can we warn them? Can we predict the conflict complexity by looking at the project history, by leveraging machine learning and the attributes of the conflicts that we have? And can we use a development context to scope the impact analysis? So we can perform some more sophisticated program analysis, but use development context to scope it. So I'm going to talk about the first one, proactive conflict prediction. The tool we developed is called Cassandra. What it tries to do is, can we find conflict minimal or conflict independent paths? So if I can find multiple tasks over here, these are the constraints across the task. Can I predict when 2 tasks can be independently performed and therefore assign it that way? So the way we do that is, first we obtain the task context, that is which files are likely to be changed for which task. The ideal input is from bug triaging, you get that information, but if that information is not available, maybe we can use data mining and kind of machine learning to predict which files will be changed. Find out also the dependent files based on call graph analysis. Analyze which task would have constraints that could lead to conflicts. Formalize this as constraints. Hard constraints means something has to be finished before the other part of the task can be begun, so you cannot break that constraint. Soft constraints are if there is no solution and you can let those two tasks happen, there might be a problem, there might be a conflict, but you can let it happen. Then we evaluate it. We use the Microsoft Z3 constraint satisfaction tool, CSP solver. And when we look at it is there a solution? If there is two paths that can happen in parallel, we say that there is a solution, and then we try to optimize it based on the developer's preference. Like, can we make it easier and more akin to the form, the order that the developer had put up? If we do that, we kind of reevaluate to find the right solution. Then we display it through the IDE, this is an Eclipse Mylin plugin. And if there is no solution, if the task space is so constrained that there is no independent task that can happen, then we have to find out what could we do. And now comes the question, we have to relax maybe some constraints. How do we know which constraints we can relax? And here again, we can get the development context to help out, right? We can say, these conflicts are really, really severe, so you should not relax constraints that lead to such kind of conflicts, or some attributes that will lead to this kind of conflict. Or Dick is very important to our team right now, he's on the release path, let no constraints or no conflicts that deal with him be relaxed, right? We can use the heuristics from the team to figure out what would be the best way to relax some of these constraints. When we saw the results, we looked at those 4 projects that I talked about, looked at their past history, looked at how the conflicts had developed, go back in time, and then use Cassandra and see if we could have found different task ordering that would have not led to these conflicts. And we found that 50 to 97% of the conflicts were avoided. So there are 4 projects. We took weekly, daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, and 6 months time. And then we ran the constraints. We found even after optimization, most times to get the solution, if there was a solution, was 2 to 3 seconds. If you optimized it, and the maximum time it took for one of the projects, Voldemort, for a 6-month data was 3 minutes. So it's very fast to do that. So even if you're making some changes, and then you realize that, oh, I have to make this new file, we can run Cassandra after someone checks in, and then you have the new constraint space. So ongoing work was then to find out, because we depend on the task context precision, how much of sensitivity does Cassandra have? Can we include imprecision and still be able to find good results? So we added simulation data to get 25, 50, 75% imprecision in the data, and we found that we were still at 94% was the highest. Lowest was, I think, 90%, that we were still able to find alternate paths or alternate task orders. We still have to find out what are the good unsat heuristics that work. We want to talk to industry to look at that. We also want to consider task duration. In the initial version, we don't consider how long a task is going to take as part of a constraint when we run the analyzer. And of course, we want to deploy it. So some solutions I said, that's the first one I spent more time, and since I have only 3 more minutes left, the other 2 solutions that we are kind of looking at is, can we understand what's conflict complexity? So we took, for these 4 projects, all the conflicts that happened before and the resolution times, and then other attributes like which files were involved, how many files were involved, which authors were involved, and ran machine learning. Kind of see, can we predict what a conflict severity would be? And we found F measures, which is a combination of precision recall, that we got pretty good metrics. Like for merged conflicts, we had 0.92, which means we had pretty high precision as well as good recall of all the hard conflicts. And build was 0.87, and test failures were 0.84. The other ongoing work is talking about development context, right? Running this sophisticated symbolic execution kind of program analysis is really hard because things are changing, and change sets might be small and across many workspaces, right? So what we want to say, what is the change of interest? What does the client want to know? Does it want to know if I'm going to affect anybody else? Does it want to know what's the effect of Kerry's changes on my work? So based on what the client wants to know, we can scope what the change is that we're going to analyze. Moreover, we can find out what is the range of or region of interest. Maybe typical program analysis take one version or the other version and find every place where impact would be. Maybe for this particular case, we don't care about all the places an impact would happen. We only care about who else is working right now and may be impacted. So we scope the region of interest. We only find those people who are actively working now, or maybe specific APIs. They are public APIs. Nobody should touch them. And if the impact reaches there, that's a problem. And this is my final slide. So what we have done so far is in contributions, eliminate seclusion, but maintain installation so you still have your private workspace, but you know what's happening. Go from early detection of conflicts to proactive detection, from just looking at the file level conflict notification to at the task level, so I can actually rearrange what I'm going to do. Instead of you telling me while I'm working on some task, hey, there's a problem, you tell me earlier on at the task level. Find out how can we look at conflict complexity, and if we can scope change impact analysis by looking at the active development context. Thank you to my funding and all the people who have been involved, my students, other collaborators, and I'll take questions because I have 1 minute.
Have you looked at the impacts on the merge conflicts from a time between merges, as well as the impact of human review, code review on those things before merge?
So we did not look at the effects of reviews because we looked at open source, and this was the data that we found, and this particular project had no inspection or code review information in there. So what we have looked at is these were the changes and when they were merged with the master branch, because these projects all had a shadow repository as the master. So this was all post any review that would have been done. So when they were actually putting it back into the master branch. So no, I did not look at the effect of the inspection.
In that case, there's a lot of implicit code reviews that go on in most open source projects on GitHub with pull requests. And so the comment count or the activity there might give an indication of how much actual review is being done before merges. But
Okay, we can do the correlation on the amount of comments and see if there's any difference between. Thank you.
Okay, in the interest of kind of getting us back onto schedule, I'm going to thank Anita one more time.